Hello everyone, can you hear me all right? Oh, what an amazing gang. My name's Dan and I'm an ACT UP London activist. Hands up who's pissed off at this shitstorm of a government. Right, you're in the right place. Hands up who wants to be inspired by new ways of organising. Great. And hands up who wants to be inspired by legendary movements that we stand on the shoulders of. Great. And build new coalitions and renew your spirit for more activism. Great. We're all in the right place. Thank you so much for coming to the launch of the Fund Healthcare Not Warfare UK Coalition. I'm going to read a tiny little description about that. From New York to London to Berlin, queer, healthcare and anti-war activists are uniting. Fund Healthcare Not Warfare is a new coalition of anti-war, Jewish Voice for Peace, Palestinian solidarity activists and healthcare movements to demand a permanent ceasefire now and an end to the Israeli occupation, apartheid and settler colonialism. Whilst our government's military budget drastically increases, services to healthcare continue to be precarious. This is in tandem with the relentless politicisation and assaults on trans and reproductive healthcare, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the housing crisis. Our governments must fund healthcare, not warfare. However, they probably won't because we've seen the state of them. So we've got to organise for it ourselves. Palestinians deserve to live with freedom and dignity. Everyone deserves access to healthcare. So thank you again for coming tonight. We've got an amazing panel for you this evening. I'm just going to read the description of ACT UP. Now, the Fund Healthcare Not Warfare campaign started on World AIDS Day 2023 in New York. And as we can see from the images, revamped the incredible campaign messaging from back in 1991, from the Fight AIDS Not Arabs campaign, where they set up a giant banner in New York Grand Central Station for what we're facing today. And for me, ACT UP have always been incredible inspiration when it comes to systems thinking and coalition building and connecting the dots. And ACT UP stands for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. It's a diverse, non-partisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the HIV pandemic, along with the broader inequalities and injustices that perpetuate it. Remembering that HIV and AIDS is foremost a political crisis as well as a medical emergency, we will use every means possible to call out and contain this pandemic. We are never silent. And a few thank yous. First of all, to Amnesty for hosting us. And we've got some incredible Amnesty workers tonight. So much praise and gratitude to Amnesty, particularly for writing the report, Israel's Apartheid Against Palestinians, Cruel System of Domination and Crime Against Humanity, which really helped set the stage and clarified that what we know, but for a wider public, it is an apartheid. So thank you to Amnesty. And a few logistical things. The toilets are underneath us, under -3, and use the lift just there if you like. The emergency exits are here and there. So that's the logistical stuff. And now I want to introduce you to our amazing panel. First of all, on my left, we've got one of my most favourite humans alive. Andrea, when were you first involved in ACT UP?
1988.
1988. So we did, and a lot of us were here, we did the die-in in Trafalgar Square last World AIDS Day 2022, which a lot of us were here. And Andrea was there 30 years before, and her persistence and inspiration is relentless. Just a bit more about Andrea. Andrea's life partner, John Morden, died of AIDS, was an incredible drug user rights harm reduction activist. Andrea lives with her incredible daughter, Millie, and has been bringing the war on drugs against people who use drugs since 1998.
Fighting it, yeah.
And spoke and took the fight to the UN in New York City. So we have a round of applause for Andrea. We have also got Claude Leonescu, ACT UP London, based campaigner and advocate for human rights and social justice, born in Romania. With a background in communications, patient advocacy and policy work at a European level, Claude cares deeply about systems thinking and actionable insights and was really formidable with putting a lot of the preparation together for tonight. Claude's campaign specifically across sexual health and reproductive justice, immigration and asylum seeking and queer rights. Claude has been organising with ACT UP since 2022 and is also a volunteer as a detention centre caseworker supporting Romanian immigrants and are on the board of trustees for a refugee charity. We've got our hands together for Claude. And then Fatima Mohammed, and it was such a joy to first meet you. We've been having Zoom calls for months now to get to where we are today. And I was so inspired from the moment that we connected. Is an activist with healthcare workers for a free Palestine. Round of applause. Is a Muslim, a mother and a midwife. Fatima is an alloy of British, Egyptian and Bengali constituents whose passions lie in advocating for marginalised and vulnerable groups. The importance Fatima applies on activism has made her a member of Healthcare Workers for a Free Palestine, the Association of South Asian Midwives and the Critical Midwifery Studies Collective. Fatima's work also strives to dismantle patriarchy, white supremacy and racism with a focus on protecting the dignity and respect of those harmed or in harm's way. In addition to this, Fatima runs the weekly Cultural Safety Book Club. Round of applause. And next, we've got Hassan Kilani from Queers for Palestine. Hassan is a Palestinian queer feminist activist and writer based in London. Studied an MA in transnational queer feminist politics at SOAS University of London and worked in the past 12 years in the inclusion of LGBTQIA+ refugees in the humanitarian sector in the Swana region. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Sarah Lesoye from MedAct. And Sarah is Transforming Peace and Security Campaigns and Programs Lead at the public health charity MedAct. And in her role, she supports health workers to campaign for change on issues such as the securitisation of health and humanitarian impacts of arms, global conflict and war. Sarah has a background in student organising, higher education campaigning and global health research. Sarah's research interests and wider work are focused on addressing state violence and developing an abolitionist public health. So we don't need those fuckers in Parliament. We've got an incredible panel like this. Thank you again. And my dear Pat at the back was reminding me, I'm not on the panel, I'm chairing it, but there are two badges of honour that I wear, being an ACT UP activist and being now what's called bad Jew in the eyes of the Zionists, which I'm not happy with just being a bad Jew. I want to be a terrible Jew. If that means fighting tooth and nail for the liberation of Palestine. So they're the two badges of honour, being an ACT UP activist and a bad Jew. And I want you all to help me because I have only reached number 86 on the British self-hating Jewish list. So I'm obviously not working hard enough. And that was back in 2005. And that's a list set up by Zionists, and often a lot of them aren't even Jewish, to target Jews who do what the most important thing about being a Jew is, which is standing up for the humanity of everyone.
Yes.
We've got my latest film in development, which is called The Bad Jew Club, and you'll read more about that. But yeah, thank you so much again. It means so much to have this incredible panel and all of our incredible ACT UP community here and new ACT UP community as well. So lastly, just a little bit of the running order. We're going to watch two short films about the roots of where this has come from. A tiny little 5-minute trailer of United in Anger. And I know a lot of people will come here angry tonight, and anger is one of the most important emotions to catalyse us forward. It's an incredible film about the history of ACT UP. We're just going to watch the trailer. Then we're going to watch a few, it's like 3 minutes, a solidarity message from one of the ACT UP New York activists who started the Fund Healthcare Not Warfare movement. Then Claude is going to launch into our panel, and then as you can see from the papers on the table, we're going to go into group discussions to harvest the insights from our incredible panellists and come up with initial ideas for actions for how we can take this forward. When we did the Fund Healthcare Not Warfare launch in Berlin 3 weeks back, it sparked loads of incredible actions, and last Sunday we invaded the Berlinale, which is the film festival, because at the film convention they invited Israeli film producers, and inspired by the ACTA action that took place in Grand Central Station in '94, when they did the banner drop, Fight AIDS Not Arabs, the activists who came to the launch were inspired by that and created a banner which said Lights, Camera, Genocide, and released it in the middle of the Berlinale and shut it down. And to actually lots of applause from people in there. So these are some of the ideas that we can take forward. I'll shut up now. Jack, could you and help us with the? I know, was I supposed to do that? No, there we go. Oh, no, put the lights on.
Yeah, can you see over our heads, everybody?
Yeah.
We were very scared that the Reagan administration was going to put people with AIDS in internment camps. And I think that we came close to that in this country.
How deeply are Americans worried about AIDS? The Los Angeles Times poll found that 50% of Americans favor quarantine for AIDS victims. 15% said AIDS victims should be tattooed.
It was about people in power not caring about the lives of people who didn't have power.
Kramer delivered a fiery speech, and I remember he asked like half of the audience to stand up, and he said, "You're all going to be dead in 6 months. Now what are we going to do about it?"
AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. We are a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis.
Release those drugs! Release those drugs! When we're activists, when we really act up, we have a big impact, and we can when we're demanding, and when we're silent, we don't.
It was where I really got a sense of community.
I mean, I got the feeling then that people felt that lives depended on it.
These drug companies are profiteering on our lives, and that we cannot accept that anymore.
Hello, my name is Ariel, and I am a member of ACT UP New York, and I am so proud to share that ACT UP unanimously has supported and endorsed your Fund Healthcare Not Warfare movement, and this entire movement going global is personally just so energizing and inspiring and exciting and heartwarming and giving me feelings of solidarity I have never felt before. And honestly, it's humbling to know that ACT UP New York has inspired any of this. And so thank you so much for taking a stance to, stand up against a medical apartheid and to demand justice for everyone, including justice for Palestinians. ACT UP New York has been proudly anti-war for decades, as started in our day of desperation 33 years ago to protest the Gulf War, and as was continued between 1999 and 2003 when we pushed the US government to end sanctions in post-apartheid South Africa. And, you know, standing in solidarity with Palestine these past months has just been a continuation of that work. But our World AIDS Day action, where we first stood with our beautiful pink triangle watermelon symbol and had signs reading "Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare" go live on our social media with Jewish Voices for Peace, really did kickstart a new moment in ACT UP New York. We were a pretty small group before. I wasn't even active the past few years until that moment. But I saw all around me these young people who were looking for ways to plug into meaningful and actionable organizing, but not knowing where to turn. And ACT UP, we have generations of organizers and activists who knows what's required in these moments to build power and to stand up to oppressive regimes. And I really wanted to join ACT UP again and bring all these people alongside me and find our veterans who were feeling angry and feeling a call to action in this moment for Palestine, to plug back in and to give these young people some inspiration and pass on some knowledge. And ACT UP New York, to be honest, went from being only several active members meeting every week virtually to proudly having, I don't know, over 100 active members now, and to be having actions all the time, to be going to protests with our banners reading "Silence Equals Death," with our pink triangle watermelon artwork, with banners saying "Fund Healthcare, Not Warfare," and "Silence Equals Death," and "Fight AIDS, Not Arabs." And to also be having fundraisers to work alongside Rain Dove, who's an incredible activist who's on the ground in Egypt delivering cash aid as a proudly queer and trans person alongside Palestinians and a group of queer activists to directly aid people fleeing Gaza. And to also be in coalition with so many other amazing organizations here in New York that are looking for new and inspiring ways to meet the urgency of this moment. We also are so proud to be endorsing BDS, and you know, it's a long time coming. This has been a dream of mine since 2018 when I first joined ACT UP, but it took a moment of urgency, for a moment of action for us to really stand up and take a stance, and to also demand that other LGBTQ-led organizations meet this moment and call for a permanent and immediate ceasefire alongside us, and to endorse BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanction movement, inspired by South African activists who were using boycotts to stand up against apartheid. And I hope that you guys here are building new movements and new coalitions to, again, just take a stance for humanity and for justice for Palestine. So all I can say is thank you, and fight back, fight AIDS, free Palestine. Thank you so much, and I'm sending all of my love here from New York City to you. And you know what? Hopefully one day I see you in the streets alongside me. My heart is with you. Thank you so much. Mwah.
Hi everyone again. Really lovely to have you all here, and it's so exciting to see so many people. Basically, initially our brief was to talk about what we're most excited about when it comes to this coalition, and my answer would be simple. It would be community building and solidarity, and meeting people who have brilliant ideas and come at it from sort of different perspectives. But the brief kind of changed, so I'm gonna kick us off by talking about, can you hear me?
Yeah, you go closer to it maybe.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. I'm a data person. I love numbers, I love facts, I love analysis. So I will be setting the scene with talking about a recent jarring report that actually just came out earlier this month. So the report is called Crisis in Gaza, and it is essentially a scenario-based health impact projection that was published by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicines in partnership with the Johns Hopkins University in the US. And essentially, why I think this is important is because it looks at 3 different scenarios. So it looks at the impact on public health in Gaza if we were to have a permanent, immediate ceasefire. If the second scenario sort of assesses what would happen if there would be a continuation of the status quo, so basically what we've been seeing over the past 4 months. And the third scenario, which is the worst one, in case there would be a particular escalation of the conflict. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that these projections are not predictions of what will happen in Gaza, but they do provide a range of sort of potential scenarios of what could happen. The other thing that I really liked about this study is that it's not a one-time thing. This is the first of a series of reports that are going to go on to be published until May. I would encourage everyone to take a look at it because it's a very comprehensive study. I'm only going to sort of pick some numbers that I found quite hard-hitting and have stayed with me since I first read them. Very specifically, during the first phases of a rapid onset crisis in general, there is a minimum ratio of 1 communal toilet per 50 people. So that is sort of generally what happens in a situation of war similar to what we're seeing right now. Now, in Gaza, if we were to have a permanent ceasefire today, there would still be a ratio of 1 communal toilet per 130 to 350 people. If we were to maintain the status quo, it would be 1 communal toilet going up to 800 people. And then in the case of an escalation, it would be 1 communal toilet per 1,000 people. Then we have access to soap. In the case of a ceasefire, about 50 to 70% of civilians would have access to soap. Second scenario, it sort of would go down to 30 to 40%, and in the case of an escalation, it would be only 10%. So only 10% of the current population in the Gaza Strip would have access to soap, which I'm talking about sanitation because, as I'm sure everyone knows, it is deeply linked to health outcomes and sort of the state of the health of the population. Then I think this was very important to me because I think people sometimes tend to overlook things like chronic conditions and non-communicable diseases when it comes to situations of conflict and war because they're considered to be less of a priority than fatalities and injuries and wounds and things like that. I wanted to look at cancer, for example, based on what was in the study, and the first thing I want to say, and I'm sure some people here would know that, there is only 1 cancer hospital in Gaza, and that has stopped functioning since November. October? October or November. So since then, a lot of the people who have been displaced, a lot of the people who are still there, they are not able to access their sort of usual cancer treatments. That means they have discontinued care and they are risking even worse sort of health outcomes. Now, even in the case of a ceasefire, so going back to the 3 scenarios, only 20 to 50% are estimated to be able to access treatment. And then if we look at the other 2 scenarios, so an escalation or a continuation, it goes down to 1 to 5%, which is horrendous. It's a horrendous number. Lastly, and this was also something that stayed with me, it kind of keeps me up at night, it's grueling. In terms of mental health, 4 out of 5 children in the Gaza Strip live with depression, grief, and fear as a result of 15 years of blockade and previous military attacks. And we've seen an increase in cases of post-traumatic stress disorder, severe depression, anxiety. All of them are being on the rise. I'm sure everyone, again, has seen the horrendous footage of children who are so shocked they are unable to scream or speak, children who get triggered by thunderstorm thinking another bombing campaign is happening. So it's a dire number to think about, and it also has long-term consequences and implications that some of them we can't even start thinking about right now. In terms of my takeaways, there are. I'll go through. She's keeping my time. I picked out a couple, but I'm just going to talk about 2 because I don't have enough time. So my main takeaway has been that excess deaths from infectious diseases under all scenarios are a particular concern. So even if we get a permanent, immediate ceasefire today, we still need to think about the long-term consequences and the needs that are on the ground, and how we sort of from an international community point of view, how can we put pressure on our decision makers here, how can we organize, how can we partner with people on the ground to make sure that we alleviate the burden. Now I know some people will be like, yes, but they're being attacked right now, so why are we talking about this? But I think as we move into the community building exercise, it's good to think immediate short term, but also it would be fantastic if we could think long term, how could we influence these outcomes, and how can we already embed these as priorities in our sort of activism and organizing. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, increases in the risk of maternal, neonatal, and postnatal and stillbirth deaths. These are, of course, linked to deterioration of water, sanitation, food insecurity, and most importantly, the disrupted health services. Also, as part of this study, there was this key fact that said, crucially, under the escalation scenario specifically, so the 3rd scenario, experts project a regression of mortality numbers not seen for nearly a quarter of a century. So basically, they would be eroding the past 20 years of health progress, which is horrendous. I had a bit more to talk about, but I'm going to link it back to what's happening here right now. We're in a recession. We have a lot of issues, from food poverty to cost of living crisis to energy crisis. We are in our 8th year of failed NHS waiting list targets. We are witnessing sort of a continued disinvestment and underfunding of our social care services, and all of this is having a massive sort of seismic impact across all of our lives. And then at the same time, if we look at the UK's military spending budget, it was already massive. This year, it has been estimated to be 51.7 billion, which is huge, and that is an increase of almost 6 billion from the previous year. I had a bit of a, I don't have the clicker. Do I have the clicker?
Yeah, you do.
I had a bit of a look at King's College University, and they did some sort of estimations, and then from there I kind of extrapolated the data and landed on these estimations. So very, very quickly, the increase alone from last year to this year would help us pay for over 160,000 nurses. They could pay for 1 million small ventilators. They could also cover the annual budgets of almost 6 of England's biggest hospitals. And then the increase alone could help cover the costs for 15 weeks of social care from sort of local councils. So I know I ranted a bit and I went with a bit of numbers at you, but I know the rest of the panel is going to talk about things that are very different, so I hope as we move on into the community building bit, you can keep some of the facts and figures top of mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. Those facts and figures are like formidably useful. We are going to have time for Q&A at the end of the panel, so keep your questions, write them down, use the paper if you want. But over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Cool, thanks so much. I feel like that was like actually really helpful framing for us all to start with before then delving into the other speakers. So yeah, even me, I'm thinking a lot about it. But yeah, thanks everyone for being here, making the time to be here. My name's Sarah, I work at MedAct, and I'm a campaigner, so I support health workers who do active campaigns on a variety of things that I'll share a bit about now. But yeah, just to introduce MedAct, I guess, yeah, a public health campaigning organisation. Our campaigns range from, you know, multiple intersecting issues, so like climate justice, economic justice. Right now that campaign's focused on housing and health. Access to healthcare for migrant communities in the UK, and then peace and security, which is what I focus on. We talk a lot about health justice as a term at MedAct, and I'll speak a bit about it in a second, but I think it's a useful term and phrase because I think the term justice evokes, you know, an acknowledgement of like global power imbalances, injustices, and the fact that health is a political perspective or vantage point from which we can do liberatory work. And I think, yeah, I'm sure Fatima will speak to this a bit, but like, and many of you probably know, but health in the UK at least, health globally as a space, is so depoliticized, like intentionally so, and you know, so that you don't make those connections between the practicalities of resources that would be available to you in conjunction with spending on military, you know, resources in the UK. So like, yeah, I think that it's a really useful perspective and vantage point. And right now at MedAct, we have two groups who are organising and trying to do the kind of coalition building and practical campaigning that can shift the political position, essentially, of like the UK government on two specific areas. So we have a nuclear weapons group focus, who, interestingly enough as well, it made me think a lot about kind of ACT UP's own history, because they are the legacy of like the medical peace movement in the UK. They have done like active campaigning for nuclear disarmament since, you know, I can't even, like the 70s. They've been around for a long time. The oldest member of our group is in her 80s, called Liz, who's great. And every month they jump on a Zoom call and think about proactive campaigns they can do to shine a light to, you know, military spend broadly, and specifically the issue of nuclear weapons. I'll refer to my notes. I feel like the main connection that I wanted to draw between that group's work and ACT UP's work and like the potential for coalition building in this space is kind of the internationalist outlook that they can adopt and the potential that's drawn there. So even though, you know, these issues can seem very niche, particularly nuclear weapons, when there are like so many other pressing things that are like, you know, the cost of energy and climate justice and, you know, housing and access to healthcare that feel so immediate to the British public and should be treated as such. I think it's so important to draw the connections between not just the funding of these things, but also like the internationalist and like historical connections that we actually have a responsibility to repair. So in the nuclear weapons space, we think a lot about like nuclear testing sites and the sites in which nuclear testing has happened, and has this historically been in the global south? Yes. Have those communities been reimbursed? No. And so like we will try and think across to like make connections with the climate justice movement and illustrate that, you know, through a health perspective and looking at the health concerns of these communities, we say, well, how does that change how we should think about our relationship with these countries, and what does reparations mean, and how do we think about healing in the long term, etc. So that's just one example. And then also, yeah, on a mining perspective as well, like, you know, uranium is mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so like when, you know, countries in the global north are thinking about nuclear energy as this liberatory, like transformative potential option for the future, we also have to think about who is going to be the, you know, or what places, what countries, what peoples are going to be on the underside of those systems and structures, and will they get, you know, the benefits of, you know, nuclear energy in the future? What will the cost be to them, and like, are we willing to think about that before we set off on these, like, you know, futuristic modernizing like endeavors, etc. So there's a lot of thinking that group are doing. Yeah, together as a movement, we think about militarization, we think about policing and securitization, we think about the fueling of global conflict and war, and how they deeply connected to health and health practices across public life. The movement of healthcare workers, health academics, and public health professionals in the UK, I think are just here primarily to add their voices to a growing movement for healthcare and not warfare, to connect back to today. Also, yeah, I wanted to draw kind of a connection between three areas of our work, or areas of campaigning work, that fall under this term of like the securitization of healthcare, because I think a lot about security, the idea of security, the idea of national security, and like, you know, global military spend being justified by the idea that we need to be quote unquote secure and safe. I feel like that's probably a timer saying I should stop speaking now. 1 minute now, perfect. But yeah, thinking about security is a really useful, again, like a useful vantage point to say, like, what does a health justice informed security look like? What does, you know, the term human security, what does that look like as opposed to like a nationalized, like militaristic approach to security? Does the kind of government standard of security actually keep us safe? Who does it keep safe? Is our safety, quote unquote, predicated on the, you know, lack of safety and security of other people's? And is that the kind of safety and security we want to be recipients of? My answer is no. So, like, I think, yeah, in the health space, we think about the maintenance of, as I've mentioned, nuclear and military, like weapons and arsenals as like something that we don't want to rely on as a form of like safety and security, health security and safety. We think about challenging racist, xenophobic, border and hostile environment immigration policies within the NHS under one of our campaign areas too. We're challenging the anti-refugee bill, we're challenging the Rwanda bill, we're thinking about how to make access to healthcare a form of, you know, liberatory, a vantage point for liberatory thinking around borders. And yeah, and the securitization of health, we're thinking about militarization internally too. We're thinking about policing and policing practices within the NHS that deter people from health seeking, but also that make them vulnerable and actually cause harm within the healthcare space, and how oftentimes healthcare workers can be actively, if not actively doing that, complicit in that kind of like harm that people receive when they, you know, seek mental health care or another form of care. So there are a lot of challenges. I'll end on like a final kind of rallying note, which was collectively written by a few of our health workers who've been part of different health movements for Palestine since in the last 4 months, and beyond that actually for a long time now. But yeah, as an organisation committed to health justice, as I've spoken to, MedAct has long stood for the rights of Palestinian people in their struggle for liberation, as we stand with all people seeking freedom from violent oppression. Israel's ongoing genocide follows decades of violence against Palestinians by means of deprivation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, illegal occupation, and settler colonialism. And Palestinians now face a health crisis, but a crisis fundamentally of catastrophic proportions, which I won't go into because I think we are all aware of and has been spoken to really strongly already. There's power in an internationalist health worker movement, as we've seen, and you know, we see doctors on the news, we see midwives on the news, we see health workers coming to the fore for a specific reason, because they're able to vocalize a call for a ceasefire, yes, but they're also able to vocalize a call to end our government's complicity and like activity in arms sales, diplomatic support to Israel, for an end to the illegal siege on Gaza and all Palestinian territory. And I think calling for Palestinian liberation can so easily and does so easily map onto what we vision as health justice, because without Palestinian liberation, without the actualization of like truly healthcare dignity in the most expansive sense for all, we don't have the kind of health justice that we are supposedly advocating for. So until, you know, all of us are free, etc., you know.
Thank you so much. Also, really thank you for hosting us. It's really a privilege. So, my name is Hassan Kilani, and I'm here representing Queers for Palestine. So, the name itself, it comes from what it is. It actually emerged from the last protests against the genocides that's happening in Gaza, and it meant to create a community of the queer people sitting together in solidarity to protests, to educate, as well as to actioning. And speaking about doing action, I really would like to talk about this Saturday. I want to encourage all of you to join us for a protest against the National Student Pride, that's the name. And it is the reason why we're asking for boycotting this event and why we need to protest against this event is their biggest donors are on the list of the companies that are now funding the genocide happening in Gaza. And this is forms of pinkwashing is not acceptable, especially today, especially among queer people who's really nowadays should be awakening for all forms of pinkwashing. So today I would like to talk about my own lived experience as a Palestinian, as someone who's visibly queer, grown up in West Bank in Palestine. And how many times I crossed these checkpoints and how many times I was humiliated for not being from the occupation forces, for not being manly enough, for not being the man, for humiliating in front of my family, in front of other Palestinian people standing in these checkpoints. Not just enough that I have to be waiting for 2 hours to just go from one neighborhood to another. I had to be also being humiliated for my voice tone, for the way I walk, for the way I speak. And even a simple act, as someone who's 16 years old, looking on TV, seeing Ricky Martin wanted to do a red hair or wanted to do an earring, it felt like I was not fighting my parents, who is, of course, as we know, like many of our parents are kind of queerphobic. But it's not a fight with my family, it's not a fight with my society, it's actually a fight against also occupying forces. It felt like a war that I have to conduct every day. One time I have to fight for being visibly queer, for my queerness among my society, and I have to fight for the occupation against my people. And one thing I want to say here is, while Israel tried to promote itself as the queer heaven or as the gay heaven, it's so important to say a place where systematically brutalize queer Palestinians is not a queer heaven. It is an apartheid. It's gives the right to someone to express their queerness while I'm sitting just behind the wall watching and not being able to express myself this way. And as we all know, queerphobia, it exists. As I worked across the Middle East and I worked in the US and now I'm in London, it is manifest differently from one location to another. But we often thought it's only with the barbaric Palestinians, of course. However, one thing struck me when I was fighting alongside people in the US or people in Iraq or people in Jordan is that our fights as Palestinians took against us. They used our wordings, they used our fight to justify our massacres and the genocide against our people. So it feels like I'm sabotaging myself, or it feels like I am sabotaging my community if I want to fight for the change. And that's something I didn't see anywhere else in the world, and that something needs to stop. I hope I'm on time. Thank you again for that.
Go for it. You don't?
No.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'm an angry person, so I'm going to use the podium. Go on, Fatima. Okay. The past 4 months have been the litmus test for every moral standard. I will never forget this period of cumulative and combined grief, betrayal, and rage. How can it be anything else when we have witnessed mass displacement, mass graves, mass sorrow, mass hunger? How can it be anything else when we have witnessed shameless dehumanization, pain, and humiliation of the Palestinian people? It would take a lot to turn a blind eye to the countless orphaned, amputated, or chalky bodies of killed children. But the powerful who could end the horror and inhumanity almost immediately have blinded their eyes and boxed their souls because the killing has not stopped. At this point, and as a midwife, I have lost faith in Western values. The West can no longer be a moral authority in the eyes of anyone who understands the pernicious nature of injustice and white supremacy. Not just because we are witnessing Palestinians, a distant people with a foreign, scary-sounding religion, be displaced and condensed, then starved, maimed, and killed with wanton abandon, but because healthcare, the very seat of dignity and justice, is being decimated in front of us, and it has not stopped. In the meantime, our own healthcare authorities carry on, attempting to pretend their colleagues in Palestine have not been detained and tortured, or that women are not undergoing caesarean sections, a major abdominal surgery moving through 7 layers of tissue without anaesthetic. Instead, our government and institutions are content to remain silent and continue arming Israel, without shame or reason, almost as though they are maniacally trying their hardest to violate every value of justice they proclaim to have. Alongside ancient churches, mosques, schools, universities, and libraries, every hospital in Gaza has been forced into calamity and chaos at the terrorizing, strangling hands of Israeli aggression. Don't let them insult your intelligence with their threadbare reasons and lies. Know that it is all in pursuit of making the area utterly unlivable for Palestinians, pushing their instinct to live to the very limits in an attempt to make them give up life entirely or their land, as proven by talks and preparations of the Sinai Desert. All in pursuit of settler colonialism, the worst and most aggressive kind, because it combines the original sin of land theft along with erasure of the indigenous people of that land, physically, culturally, and historically. Every human being has the right to a wholesome life of dignity and safety. Healthcare is an important facilitator of such a right. Seeing hospitals be targeted, surrounded, and bombed should be enough to evoke our outrage. It should be enough to stop arming Israel. Seeing the sacred and vulnerable environment of sick and injured people be bulldozed should be enough to end the occupation. Seeing still non-breathing babies in rubble-streaked clothes should alight every nerve in our souls to call and cause a ceasefire. But the killing has not stopped. Don't be mistaken. Occupation is oppression, and our rage is justified, because our values for the sanctity of life, of healthcare, of dignity, has been violated in the most brutal and cruel way. Anger, under-regulation, can guide us to act for the protection of our values. It is why healthcare workers for a free Palestine have targeted capitalism where it hurts, direct action on the companies who profit off of human life, such as Albert and Palantir. Because complicit governments will raise their heads not at loss of life, or famine, or dignity, certainly not for brown people, but at loss of profit and lost routes to accelerate greed. There is a well-connected Israeli movement to silence opposition to the genocide. They have used every tactic to demonize and dehumanize the Palestinians, especially the men, by presenting them to the world through a colonial lens of savagery and uncivility. They have also attempted to taboo criticism of Israel by making anti-Zionism synonymous with anti-Semitism, despite Gaza being the undeniable proof that Zionism enveloped the perfect package of European colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy. Healthcare workers have been targeted, referred to their professional bodies, and intimidated into silence or even the slightest support of Palestinian resistance against occupation. I too have been targeted. My workplace received several emails spouting the usual, that I am a terrorist sympathizer, anti-Semitic, and unsafe for Jewish women, as though all Jewish women were a singular monolith, as though all Jewish women support the killing of other people. Even UK Lawyers for Israel have contacted the CEO of my organisation and reiterated a demand for my immediate dismissal. The purpose was, of course, to strike fear into my soul and psyche, embrittle me with anxiety, and bulldoze my spirit for dignity and justice. They attempted this by instigating a pathway with the aim of the removal of my voice, whether that be by ending my employment or by intimidating me into silence. But there is no space for me to feel fear when I have my children safe, full of life, and breathing rhythmically against my cheeks when I hug them. It is imperative upon all of us to advocate for the Palestinian plight. It is one of the most important intersectional issues of our time because it is a fight for the very right to exist. Anyone who experienced being made to feel inferior, othered, or undeserving of safety, dignity, and life understands this shared vulnerability we face when one of us, when the common humanity of any of us is violated. We should remember what COVID taught us, that for us to be safe, everyone has to be too. Because disease does not recognize borders, and being human means we are not unlinked from a global community with all its cares. Don't be intimidated. Don't be silent. Speak truth and say it with love. Not only because it is the moral thing to do, or because community is dependent on us caring for each other, but for our own self-respect by not compromising our values. Our voices, our anger, and our humanity is a potent threat to oppressors everywhere. So never forget, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
Thank you so much. I actually do want to stand up, but I'm not sure that I can. I'm a bit emotional now after all these speeches, and I was thinking while everybody was talking, I'm actually, sorry Dan, but I've gone right off my 3 main points, but typical of me. What I was thinking was that one of the things that ACT UP was for me, I'm an ex-injection drug user and I came off heroin a long time ago, was that I had a sort of ready-made family of role models, and I watched people care for one another in a way that I'd never ever seen before. Like, Christian people talk about brotherly love. I actually saw brotherly love in action in a group of people who had been condemned, and I'm just sorry about this emotion. I'm fine. And I suppose that what we're seeing and hearing about is so savage that most of us can't even, we can't, it's unspeakable, isn't it? It is unspeakable, and it's daily, and all we want now, and every effort we make, and every letter we write, and every phone call we speak, and everybody we speak to now is that we must have ceasefire, and yes, it's going to be so much suffering even after all of that. But I think, for me, the thing about organising and being an activist is that we're not just building community and being politically vocal. We are caring and loving at a level that most of us don't actually ever get to do. And that is a huge privilege, and it is also really hard work, isn't it? It just is. And I just, because we've done quite well with time. Well, we were good. Yes, we were. But I'm going to just, reduce my time and just tell a little anecdote of, I was in Jerusalem 24 years ago. I went because I was invited to speak at a drug policy conference, and I needed, as you do, if you happen to be Andrea, to go and be with your peers in mental health recovery and so on and so on. And I went to this building, I saw the list of meetings, and I went to this building, and it was like 3 floors underground. It was unreal. And I was forgetting my geography, like where I was, because apart from anything else, I was still jet-lagged and all the rest of it, from London to Jerusalem. And I said to this guy, I said, why is this, I understand we're stigmatized. Is that why we're down 3 floors of a bunker? Is that Andrea? Andrea! Yes, that might be one reason, but this is Jerusalem. This is a country that's been under, been colonialised for years, and so on, and sort of woke me up. But what was most moving about this thing, which went on for 90 minutes, was it was celebrating somebody's birthday, who really should have been dead. And he had 4 or 5 years sobriety, and that's what he was celebrating. I didn't understand a word of this meeting. It was spoken in Arabic, Hebrew, and in Yiddish. And it was so powerful just to be in this room of 300 people celebrating one life. And that is what we're going to do. That is what we're going to do, because every life that is saved in this situation. Anyway, you get my drift. Thank you for listening.
I guess there's just one thing I wanted to pick up whilst I say this. Have a think about the questions, because we're then going into Q&A. And we need to write up the speeches somehow, because they were amazing. But Sarah, what you said about collective healing, I mean, just when you use that phrase, for me, as I've been living with HIV now for half my life, 20 years. And I know this sounds obvious, but it's deep, right? In the sense that we all know that it's a stress-related condition. And stress isn't just an individual thing. And so the moment, I mean, if you're not on your meds, before I was on meds, you notice, like, immediately when you get stressed, you get a red rash, or, I mean, everyone's rashes are different, but I got them on my arm, got white stuff on my tongue, I got red rashes on my temple. And so there's a direct correlation between individual and collective stress. And the stress that's going on in the world that we're all grappling with, it's healing on a just living with HIV level, being in a place like this and having these conversations, because we're working out a roadmap out of that collective stress. And when I think of my HIV family who are in Gaza, who are not getting access to medication, who can't, you know, what are their rashes, etc. going on for them. So it's really real in terms of a physiological level as well. So thank you for raising that.
I think it's really, really, really important, because in history we've had many examples of how, you know, everything felt hopeless, and then out of nowhere, because the groundswell was so enormous, which actually is happening around what's happening in Gaza, things did change. So I think that is the way that we keep our hope. And also just each and every day, the detail of the communication that we have with each other, because I think we really overlook it sometimes. And it's a very practical thing, and it's kind of boring, but it really, really matters, and that's all I want to say. Thank you.
I would like to respond, but I talk a lot, so I mean, does anyone else want to speak? Yeah. Thank you for your question, and it's something that a lot of us are feeling, and I feel like almost like Zionism and this genocide is dependent on us just fatiguing out and just be like giving up. And as long as we feel that sorrow, we're still active. We're still being active. And I think someone wisely told me it doesn't help Palestine to be stressed and mentally unwell. So I think it is important that we take breaks, because that's our privilege, not living in a war zone. But to always come back, and always to build our support networks, and to be, it's going to sound a bit preachy, but grateful for what we do have, because it does help rejuvenate hope. And as long as we have hope, there will be success. Once we don't have any hope, we've already lost. So it's just so important to keep fueling hope, and I think you do that by gratitude. Yeah.
Well said.
Thanks for your question. I think the first thing that came to mind was when people say like pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Like, I think endurance is so important, but like, and I can't credit the, I don't know, leftist thinker who said that, but if anyone can, please share. But yeah, having like optimism and hope not be empty words. Like, there is the fatigue that naturally comes. There is the, like, you know, quote unquote feeling of failure that you can't come at each day with the same level of energy. But like Fatima says, I think that reminds you that there is a, you know, as people say, like a physiological, but like a practical dysregulation that we're all collectively feeling, because this isn't normal. Like, it reminds you that this is something that is hugely destabilizing, and listening to that, I think, is an important thing to do, and not numbing it in any way, or not trying to avoid it, but to hold that and to share with people around you, and to, you know, not despair, but to express your fatigue and share that, like, you know, those moments with people. That's a form of community building that I find really important. And like, yeah, personally as well, one of my friends who's like a black feminist organizer always says like that something is changed in the doing of the thing, even if we fail. Like, I think sometimes on the left, we have historically failed forever, probably will fail a bit more. But like, the failure is not like the end point, like progress is cyclical. And like, I think that thinking about it in that way means that you can see what is changed by you showing up to the collective meeting, or you showing up to the demonstration, or you know, making a Palestinian meal with your friends, or like something happens when you do those things, and those things nourish you, and that is part of it, as much as it is like, you know, when we quote unquote win, which, you know, by our own standards, like, is going to be really hard, and that's like a long journey, but like, all of this is making up that journey as well. So like, yeah, don't beat yourself too much about it, is my 2 cents.
I mean, I think given that we are still in a party situation, this party, that party, etc., etc., what I always do when I'm on social media is just keep going on about coalition building amongst, you know, because the thing is, even if, say, we get rid of the Tories in the next election, which everybody seems to think is inevitable, don't take anything for granted, people. Anyway, just saying. You know, we still need coalitions, because at the end of the day, you know, let's say that Keir Starmer became the next Prime Minister. Well, I'm not going to comment about Keir. He is actually my local MP. He is already disappointing so many people. So, given the system that we have at the moment, I mean, there are lots of other people organising, and, you know, we've got citizens' assemblies happening all over the place, and they're going to increasing numbers. You know, people, I've been arrested not so long ago. I know Dan has, and probably loads of other people in this room, for their activism. You know, there are some incredible from the ground up things happening. That is a fact. But in terms of the top down as well, which we're going to have to liaise with at some point, we need to be promoting coalition building. That's all I can say about that.
Can I just add, because I can't help myself. As a Muslim woman, I've never felt like anyone represents me, cares about me. Literally, I die, they don't care. They don't care. And so my energies in a political party is like kind of like it just died. It's really died. It's really gone. But I think I believe that political parties will adopt political sort of motions and actions that they believe are popular, and that is driven by the public. And so the most powerful thing we can do is drive that political motion, like make Palestine popular, make it sexy.
Yeah.
You know, that it'll be because they got up there through kind of, in my opinion, kind of dehumanizing themselves mostly. Most of them, not all of them. I was thinking about going into politics, and I'm like, I will always be kicked out. And so there's no pathway really to fighting for justice there, because those houses of parliament is what legislated slavery. It's hard to feel a niche space for yourself there. I went there recently. There was no baby changing place for me to change my baby in. I'm like, this is just like, I am not allowed here. It feels like that. So I think the most powerful thing we can do is influence public opinion, and we do that by being active, by speaking up, by being true to our own values.
I might add something, but I think the price would be a deportation sometimes. So, so I keep thinking, shall I say, shall I not say, you know? So, no, I mean, what I wanted to say in the most politically correct way, in the front of the record, is that I am very much enjoy the part of when I see sometimes the protests in France, and how the French populations, you know, when they want to protest and they have some kind of requirements, how inspiring it is, let me put it that way. And I feel that, honestly, because when I came here, so by the way, I came here like only since June, and I joined this protest, and the first time I joined this protest, I was like, this is one of the biggest protests I've ever been in my life for any case, you know, and I was like, wow, tomorrow the parliament will be, you know, deal done, millions of people in the street, what are you talking about? London is closed. And, you know, it's just like, it's deal done, khalas, you know, so just finish it. And then I was like surprised that like really it took months and months and months, and there is like, as if we're like, nothing happening, as you said, like, what is, like I lost hope, and I also lost like Do you know what exactly, is that the meaning for it? Is that what I'm going? Is this really these people, these governments responded? Is this really democracy? I mean, I was really questioning a lot of things in the conscious. And I looked at, you know, as I said, like I really was looking for something inspiring in Europe to just think of like, how can these politicians make something change? And as I mentioned, like maybe we don't need to do that, but the French style, it's very inspiring.
Yes, we're putting pressure on MPs. Yes, we're trying to put pressure on opposition and on our Prime Minister. But clearly they can kind of ignore us sometimes. So who else is there that influences policy and decision making? So I'm going to say something that has been met with a mixed bag of reactions. Why haven't we thought about civil servants? When I was watching the UN Security Council vote yesterday, the person who voted there, I know they are not a decision maker, but they are a civil servant. They are doing the big bad cat's work. Then we have special committees, we have cabinets, we have backbenchers, we have the House of Lords that we keep it exactly. And I think today, for example, is a really good opportunity to think about who else can we put pressure on top of the targets that are obvious, that we've already done that to. And we can even think more broadly internationally, because we are an international coalition. Like, what is the International Court of Justice doing? Like, is there any point to them? Are there any other sort of important, influential targets that we can look at, that we can consider as part of our organizing?
So this is going to sound like I've just dropped some MDMA, but let me just say this up here actually. So seriously, a long time ago I had this, the hottest crush on a rabbi's son. And one of the reasons that I had this very hot crush, it was after the death of my husband. My husband had only been dead about 5 years, which actually is not a short time. But anyway, the thing about this guy was that I didn't politically agree with him. He called himself a liberal, I called myself a socialist. But the one thing that he was absolutely adamant about in his trying to end the so-called war on drugs, which of course is on people, is that everybody, he didn't put it like this, but this is the truth, could be a friend. And you don't know, when you meet a stranger, who could be your friend and who could be your ally. And you know, we know now from all the years of being alive, never mind activism, is that it's 2 degrees. In other words, 2 people, we're always 2 people away from the person that can even provide the funding for something or provide the space for something, etc., etc. And we've seen this over and over again, and I'll shut up now.
There's been some great one-liners tonight. Was it, I want to fancy the rabbi's son?
One of them is focusing on like specific targets and specific calls to action, kind of following the current action of the Queers for Palestine with the Students' Pride. So like seeing where, for example, divestment is really urgent and kind of pressing on with that and identifying these kind of tension points, whether that be queer organizations that are sponsored by bar companies that are part or that are in BDS, part of BDS, and stuff like that. And second one is building coalitions that can kind of work with differences inside, but also following Palestinian leads, while also like acknowledging that there are maybe differences within different coalitions. Like our common shared kind of goal in this is following Palestinian demands and leads. and acknowledging that there might be like tapestry of different rhetorics and ideas, but that there is like this Palestinian liberation is the kind of denominator.
We talked quite a lot about the idea of politicising patients and the fact that like patients have to be a really important part of this coalition. There's been a lot of politicisation of health workers over the last few years, here over issues of pay, but also now intersectional issues, but actually ACT UP is in a very proud history of politicising what it means to be a patient. We're not just like passive service users, we're people that have political capabilities, we're people that have agency. And so yeah, we talked quite a lot about political education, taking the millions of NHS patients that there are right now who rely on the NHS, who are often being held back from getting access to NHS care, taking them on a journey to show how they can empathise with people in Palestine who have been completely denied their right to healthcare. And yeah, using examples like some of those amazing stats that were said earlier to like do infographics, like distribute flyers, whatever. But yeah, taking patients, NHS patients on like a political journey. Yeah, we talked about kind of tapping into existing action that's happening, like there's a national demo every 2 weeks, there's hundreds of thousands of people on the street, so many of those people will probably have been to like 8 demos and are thinking, I want to do more, what can I do? And so that's a great place to kind of like recruit people from and like bring them into more action. And then just super quickly on the ideas for action, we didn't make it into a SMART goal, but we talked a little bit about Eurovision. That's coming up. That's been in the news quite a lot in terms of Israel's participation, and is a great opportunity to bring up things that Hassan was talking about around pinkwashing, amplifying queer Palestinian voices. Feels like that's a really important moment. And we also talked about Palantir. They literally just been handed a £360 million contract to run a massive database for our health data in the NHS. So the government is literally giving £360 million to this awful organisation who are super pro-Israel, very anti-Palestinian. They're
not experienced at the health.
Yes, exactly. And they are fully complicit in like supporting Israel's security services, the targeting, the surveillance of Palestinians. Health Workers for a Free Palestine are already targeting them. The organisation I work for, Just Treatment, we're already targeting them. Yes, hello. Yeah, it is. So yeah, Palantir are a great target. They're really evil, and we should definitely go for them.
So we talked about different things, and the main point would be that we were talking a lot about how to engage with people that don't really feel political or don't feel also very confident, because the past bills, anti-protest bill, stop people to feel confident to just be in a protest, for example. I'm French, we don't have that. So the way we protest, for example, in France, or we take action, is possible because we don't have this law in place as well. And I think we were speaking of how then we find a way of creating action that can help people to feel confident, included, and actually have a sense of ownership. And we're talking about joy and radical joy and how activism can feel quite daunting and a bit scary and dark and really heavy, and for fair reason, because this is fucking shit. But now it's like how through different medium, like mixed media, using film, using art, rethinking how to keep on challenging traditional way of being activist and protest, we can bring more people within us, and how we can reach families, for example, and through children, how through the film screening, for example, we could bring, instead of documentary are brilliant and film for adults are brilliant, but is there any resources for kids that will push families to come, and through the kids watching, asking questions, coming back home and asking like, what's going on? Like, it will open up even more conversation, maybe even more people will follow as well. We were also talking about how food could be such an interesting way as well to bring people together. How do we bond as humans? How do we keep on bonding beyond our differences, beyond our fears? And food is something that I think is fundamental in creating bond within each other, but how that could be in a public space as well. How do you invite people around food to talk and to feel a sense of togetherness? What do we talk again? And then we were talking about how can we support people that are activists here and Palestinians here that are working endlessly, relentlessly How do we support as ally those people that have to fight for their own right of existence constantly? So how, as ally, we can create spaces to listen, to hold, and to support them, so we can keep on fighting with them, they can keep on fighting, and they can keep on also connecting with a sense of togetherness and joy.
How A to B protesting doesn't seem to be working, and looking, obviously in the spirit of ACT UP, in kind of civil disobedience, direct action, but that direct action being precise and how it can be most effective when it is precise. And you know, we do have such large amounts of people turning out and thinking creatively about what that protest might look like, and also maybe at what point do we stop engaging with the people in power in how we do our protests and how we protest. So yeah, breaking with tradition. We had some interesting points about the use of technology and crashing systems with ACT UP in the 80s, you know, with bodies being at town halls and things like that. Really thinking creatively and collectively about what our protests look like and how they can be most effective.
Bolstering a lot of MPs that are basically going to be deselected, like Absana Begum and others who are at risk of that, making people aware of the kind of no ceasefire, no vote push. And we spoke about the need in kind of knowledge building, coalition building, to push a lot of the kind of think tanks and non-profits. There are only a couple of big ones kind of sticking their neck out, getting more to do so, putting more pressure on others. That way others might feel more inclined themselves to speak out. We also spoke about appealing to kind of conservatives, like in the public, highlighting the kind of cost of war, etc. In the US, there's a kind of a big push on the right wing to not send overseas money in military aid, particularly around the UK. And if Donald Trump gets elected, he's not going to do it for Ukraine, and so the UK is going to put even more money out. So there's a risk of that. But basically appealing to other kind of intersectional issues around housing, food security, youth centres, the NHS, transport, so on and so forth. So someone had a great idea of kind of being outside hospitals when people are going in and saying, yeah, how long have you been waiting for your appointment? Well, in that time, the NHS has spent, you know, so much, and the government has sent so much money to Israel. So the NHS waiting list kind of a piece, and organising patients, which I knew Hope would talk about all the time, which is great. Just Treatment, check them out, they're amazing. And then for Moments, we kind of spoke a bit about not just kind of following politicians and so on, but big banks. And so Pride is coming up this year. A lot of big sponsors of Pride who will be, you know, have business in Israel and be funding the genocide there. And also the Commonwealth anniversary happening in about 2 weeks, which we've got, which there will be something. Keep your eyes peeled. And yeah.
Fuck up shit, shut it down. Which is very ACT UP. And yeah, just like harnessing some of that frustration, anger about the failure of Parliament and our elected politicians, and also the limitations of yeah, like you said, A to B marching in isolation and thinking through what kinds of direct action, radical action could complement and escalate the pressure, because we don't live in, unfortunately, a perfect democracy, far from it. I think public opinion is already way out there. Pro-ceasefire has been since almost the beginning of the genocide, since October 7th, yet our politicians remain intransigent. So one of the things we discussed was looking at disruption of economic flows, of economic relations between Britain and the UK. There are arms manufacturers here, of course, like BAE Systems, Elbit, maybe others, I don't know off the top of my head, but are directly complicit in the genocide. So looking to directly disrupt, occupy their factories was one suggestion, but also potentially to disrupt events. You know, I saw some activists recently disrupt a careers fair that BAE were at. That was an interesting one, in universities, for example. But we also then talked about how to, you know, there's been attempts at strike action that have been kind of call-outs on social media, haven't been super organized with like organized labor power behind it. So we thought about pressurizing, the organized labor movement here to actually take on a more leading role in threatening to shut the country down. They've proven very successful at doing that, the RMT, for example, over the last year. But we need to see that same energy around Palestine. So maybe it's about also pressuring some potential allies in the space who haven't been exercising their power to the extent that they should be.
Act up, fight hate, free Palestine. Act up, fight hate, free Palestine.